I mean, you've been up here doing media, press conferences, scrums for a while, but this is the first time it's been on a fight week for quite some time. I'm assuming you are as desperate to get in that cage as you've ever been this Saturday.
Yeah, looking back over the last 2 years, I had my moments. I had, moments of doubt, moments of wanting things to move forward, wanting to get to the next thing, wanting fights to be booked, wanting all of those different things. But now as I sit here confidently in this chair, I know that 2 years happened for me. And it was a really, really, really good process for me as a human being, as an athlete. And I'm the happiest, the healthiest, and the hardest to kill that I've ever been right now. And I'm excited to go compete.
We've spoken about what some of the outside looking in people would have to say about your hiatus, and we know that there are people who judge you for doing that, but what lessons have you learned that maybe us on the outside looking in wouldn't have realized or wouldn't realize you could learn?
It's a great question. I mean, there's so many, man. I will look back and they haven't even, some of them haven't even hit me yet, but patience is a virtue, right? It is one of the most important attributes that we can have as human beings. Yet sometimes when you flex extreme patience, you flex that extreme patience muscle, people question it, right? And yeah, it made a lot of sense. I understand what people were saying. I get it. But ultimately, whether people think that I was being hindered by and governed by outside circumstances, or whether or not they thought I was not in control, some of that is true and some of that is not true. At any given time, I could have called Hunter, called Dana, said, I'm off this train, forget Conor, give me the next guy. So I chose to wait. Maybe that's just me taking extreme accountability, which I think is a superpower. I also just know who Michael Chandler is outside of fighting inside of an octagon. All the businesses I've been working on, spending so much time with my wife and my sons, really building myself up. I mean, if you look at my track record, you look at my strength of schedule, you look at the guys that I have fought in the first 26 months, six training camps, 5 fights, every single fight was do or die, fight of the night, fight of the year, knockout of the year, debut of the year. It was just a crazy run, and a little bit of time off was not what I wanted, but it was what I needed. So the sport was taken away from me for about 1.5 years until I got into that Conor camp, and then there was a little bit of a lull to go into this Charles camp. And I'm happy it happened.
Charles Oliveira, you had one hand on the UFC title in that fight with Charles. There is a world where if you zag instead of zig this weekend, that he could maybe stop you from getting that title again, or even steal the Conor fight from you. In that sense, has Charles sort of become this manifestation of someone in your way, a roadblock that you have to overcome for your career to reach the heights that you want to reach?
That's a great perspective. I mean, I guess, yeah, you could definitely say that. I just think the way that I see it is that this is the way that it was always supposed to be. That this opportunity, getting my hand raised on Saturday night, gets me to the #1 contender spot, and I fight for the title next. And it just so happens that it's the guy who shattered my dreams of becoming the lightweight champion. In this sport, almost does not count. You could have 10 other referees in that fight with me and Charles at UFC 262, and maybe the other 10 step in. I have not hung my hat on that. I have no regrets. I'm not mad at the sport. That's the way the sport goes. But yeah, ultimately, Charles is just another guy with 2 arms and 2 legs who's my size, and I get to perform in front of in front of a Madison Square Garden crowd, get to blow the roof off the place, steal the show, and to reintroduce myself to the mixed martial arts world and the sporting world of who I am, why I fight, and who I fight for. And it's going to be a blast, and I think you could not have scripted it any better. People love a comeback story, and this one's going to be special.
That's all for me. If Charles gets your back, are you going to jump and slam yourself backwards again, or are you going to move on from that?
I don't know, because I don't know who Charles is fighting. I don't know that guy. He makes ill-advised decisions at times, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. It will be vintage Michael Chandler, foot on the gas, and non-stop action. So don't blink and buy that pay-per-view.
Normally when there's like a highlight reel finish from one guy, when the rematch possibly comes around, they seem kind of reluctant to take that rematch because their thought process is like, what can I do to top that first performance? Charles, that was the peak of his career, some would say, and then now he's rematching you and there's no belt on the line in the co-main event. Were you surprised that he even accepted this when they presented it to him?
Not surprised at all. I mean, Charles would fight anybody. Charles will fight anybody. I realize the man I'm up against. I realize the dangers that he poses. He is a decorated veteran, decorated former champion, and a decorated former foe of mine who beat me. I think, in these type of situations, there's a lot of talks that are happening behind the scenes. I mean, it just depends on what your motivation is. I think Charles Oliveira's motivation is, his conversations with the UFC go very simple in Portuguese. I want to fight for the title, and I'm sure the UFC said, okay, if you want to fight for the title, you got to get through this guy. This is the guy. And when his name got thrown out there after the Conor stuff started falling through and it looked like he wasn't coming back anytime soon, Charles Oliveira is the perfect opponent for me. It is the perfect time, and you could not have scripted it any better. So I'm not surprised whatsoever because Charles is a stud.
And there's like a group of lightweights, like you, Poirier, Charles, like you always seem one win away. Like even if you lose 2 in a row, you win, you could fight for the title next. Like, do you kind of agree with that? Like you're in that group of like Dustin lost, but then he won, and all of a sudden he's fighting for the title.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's track record, it's strength of schedule. I'm just happy I'm in this position now. No, I don't even have a fraction of the UFC fights that Poirier has, or Charles has, or some of these guys. But now I've been in the UFC long enough and fought the toughest guys, and obviously knocked out Dan Hooker. Now Dan Hooker's ranked ahead of me because he has come back and had a resurgence. I mean, it's the most violent and the most exciting division in the UFC, in the sporting world, and I am so blessed to be a part of it, so blessed to be in it, and on Saturday night I will be very blessed to be the highest ranked guy in it, not named Arman Sarukian or Islam Makhachev, and solidifying myself as the #1 contender.
And just last one for me, can I just get your thoughts on the main event between John and Stipe?
Man, the 2 heavyweight goats, it's going to be exciting. I mean, obviously you look at both guys' attributes, both being out of competition for a little while, it brings a certain amount of intrigue and mystique when guys have been out for a while. Man, you got John Jones, who is everybody's GOAT, definitely Dana's GOAT. And then you got Stipe, who has so many tools, and they're both exciting. I mean, we're talking about heavyweight fights. Sometimes heavyweight fights can tend to be a little bit boring, a little bit slow. These guys are out for blood. These guys are out for a finish from the first bell to the last bell. So make sure you buy that pay-per-view early.
Mike, you're here. You mentioned you'll be the highest ranked guy besides the next 2 we expect to fight for the title. That fight could maybe happen in January. Then if it's Islam, it could be a break for Ramadan and stuff. So ideally in your mind, when you think about fighting for the title, what does the timeline for that look like?
Yeah, obviously it's not up to me. It depends on how it all plays out. And that's, I've laid out my roadmap on camera, on the microphone. Obviously, you still got the Conor fight. That's a possibility, depending on when he gets his house in order, when he comes back, and when all that stuff gets figured out. I think it's a fight that Conor wants. It's a fight that I want. We need to finish TUF 31. So that could be something that happens in between. And I'm a guy who wants to lay all my chips on the table at times. I'm not afraid to lay all my chips on the table and bet on myself. To say, hey, you've already secured a title shot, but now Conor's coming back, and you want to take that before you fight for the title to possibly take the chance of losing it? We'll see what happens. I'm not saying yes to that. I'm not saying no to that. But I also don't know if I want to be off from November all the way to June, July, whenever it may be. I just spent 2 years on the sidelines. I don't believe this whole age thing. I don't believe in ring rust. I feel 25. I feel the most dangerous I ever have been. But the clock is always ticking, and I don't like to waste time. So we'll see. We'll see what happens, how it plays out. I don't know if I want to wait till June or July or whenever it is, because obviously he's got to go into training camp after Ramadan, which ends in March, then April and May. So we'll see how it plays out.
And you obviously are one of the most exciting fighters in the sport.
The most. I am the most, absolutely. You guys will remember on Saturday night.
And that has been for better or worse sometimes, right? You hear fighters giving analysis of this, and they're just like, I hope Michael Chandler can contain that part of him that's been in there. Is that something you have been working on at all through this time? And will any of that work, if so, matter when there's 20,000 people screaming inside Madison Square Garden?
Madison Square Garden does things to a man when he's locked inside of an octagon that few will ever be able to experience, and you cannot put it into words. But that's also why I took this fight, and that's also another layer of the story. A guy who has not won a fight in Madison Square Garden. I have not won a fight in Madison Square Garden. Once again, it's another hill to climb. It's another opportunity to prove to myself that I have continued to grow. You're going to see a lot different version of me. As I've said, Chandler 1.0 is out for blood. Chandler 2.0 is out for the belt. That does not mean it's going to be any less exciting. It does not mean that I'm going to take my foot off the gas. It does not mean it's going to be any less violent, because I only know how to fight one way, and that is extremely fast-paced and extremely violent. It's just going to be a little bit more calculated, and I will separate Charles Oliveira from consciousness on Saturday night.
Michael, is he right? Is he right?
Yes, sir.
You talked about your all these things that you've done since your layoff. You've got investing in houses and all this. During this time off, you ever just say to yourself, I'm set, screw it, retire?
No, I have not, man. If anything, it made me, unfortunately for my wife, or even my managers who are like, hey man, why don't you hang it up, Bill? Think about hanging it up sometime soon. I'm like, man, I feel like I just turned back the hands of time. I think I just fell in love even more with the sport. I mean, absence makes the heart grow fonder. And it's exactly what I needed. I fell even more in love with the sport, even through the trials and the ups and the downs and all the stuff I had to deal with. That is, being a part of the last 2 years with the whole Conor situation. But now I've got a new lease on life. I've got a new lease on this career. The vision seems so much more clear, and honestly, the sport seems freaking easy. The sport seems so much easier than it was a couple years ago. And sometimes things need to be taken away from you to have a different perspective on it. Getting locked into an octagon against Charles Oliveira is not an easy task. I don't want to make it sound like this is easy, but just my perspective of the sport is just an easier, it's a lighter load. It's a less of a burden, and I'm excited to go compete.
Right. With this win, you said you expect to fight for a title. You kind of mentioned Islam, but Arman Sarukian's another option if he wins. I mean, what's your take on that fight? Do you think he's got a good chance?
I think if you look at history and their first fight together, obviously it was a barn burner. It was pretty close in a lot of people's eyes. I don't know if I've actually watched that fight. I've just heard from people that it was close. But Arman obviously beat Oliveira last fight. Arman has been charging forward. I think right now I will be surprised if Arman pulls it off. I think Islam has continued to solidify himself as the best lightweight in the world by far with his performances, and I have no problem saying that. His hands are getting better. He just outstruck Poirier. He can out-grapple anybody. And I think he truly is doing it for more than just the punches, kicks, knees, and elbows and being the UFC champ and the glitz and glam. He's got something deeper that he's fighting for. He's fighting for an entire village, an entire portion of the country, an entire religion, and an entire legacy for himself, and also Habib and Habib's father. So it's something special. It's a beautiful story. And I think Islam's going to get his hand raised, and I think it's once again the perfect story that for me to avenge the loss against Oliveira and then fight a guy who's even more highly regarded than Charles Oliveira, and that's Islam Makhachev.
You've always come off as a very genuine guy in this sport, very honest and open. Another guy similar to that is in your division, Dustin Poirier. But he doesn't like you. He's called you fake. He's called you a dirty fighter. I know you bickered back and forth on Twitter. Is that someone that you're saying, hey, if I'm not getting a title shot, let's run that one back? I mean, it was a great fight already, and now you guys got some personal beef.
Yeah, I mean, not really. I mean, Dustin's got to win over me. He's never going to take the chance with one of his last couple fights to put that on the line and lose to me and have that stain on him the rest of his life. So I know that for sure, and I'm not really worried about it. I mean, I will be ranked ahead of him Saturday night at midnight when I beat Charles Oliveira, and we've got other options. I mean, Max for the BMF belt, Islam for the title. Obviously, you still got the Conor fight, you still got the Tough 31, finishing that, which needs to be finished. We had a contract signed. There's a lot of options for me, and I don't think he's necessarily one of them at all. But maybe someday we'll squash the beef. Probably not. I think we will at some point. Right now, we're just two dudes in the same division, looking toward the same thing.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, on your left. So I wanted to ask about the fight you just mentioned. So we're talking about your options, which are not a few, but you said that you want to fight earlier than June or July. And fight with Max Holloway makes a lot of sense in my mind because of, like you were saying, that you are the most exciting fighter in the UFC right now. Probably Max is somewhere there too, because like people love to see Max fight. I personally would love to see you and Max fight for BMF. Do you think that this could be an option for you to fight earlier than June or July, maybe fight in spring, or maybe also a trilogy with Charles could be an option? What do you think are your options in general, besides McGregor, besides the title fight? Because there are lots of reasons why those could not happen before summer, and you want to fight before summer. So what are your options? What do you think they are?
Yeah, I mean, I think Max would be the top on that list. But you know, at this point, you know, that BMF belt, putting it on the line, plus the rankings, I will be ranked ahead of him at this point. I know he's now moving up to lightweight, and I'm happy for him for that. I mean, Max, cutting weight is the worst part about the sport, and obviously him going down to 145, continuing to go down to 145, was probably not fun for him. So Max entering into the division that is already stacked, already the most exciting in the UFC, is nothing but great for all of us and for the UFC and for the fans. I think Max would be a great option. You got to put that BMF belt on the line though, so we'll see how it all plays out.
Thank you. And also, is there anybody else you think you would fight, like maybe you would enjoy fighting in the future in the lightweight division? Maybe some new names, maybe anybody you are thinking about who make great fight against Chandler?
There's some fights at 170 that I would love. Going up to 170, I really enjoyed a training camp at 170. The hoodwink, the facade of, oh my gosh, I get to go do a whole training camp and then fight at 170 and not have to cut down to 155, which is not an easy task for me. The only reason I've never missed weight, and the only reason I've never pulled out of a fight is because I have extreme discipline and I live like a champion. But it is an absolute bear to be where I'm at right now. But it's all part of the job. Like, some fights at 170 will be awesome. We kicked around some ideas, but obviously we landed on Charles because originally I wanted to stay at 170 because I had already prepared my body and mind for a 170 fight for a year and a half, the better part of a year and a half. But I was able to improvise, adapt, and overcome and get myself down to where I need to be, and I'm going to perform like a bat out of hell on Saturday night at 155.
Thank you. And who do you think, like, who's the top of your mind? Who's the first name that you think of, like, fighting in 170? About the exciting fight, about the entertaining fight, and so on. Who's the right opponent for you right now?
Colby comes to mind at 170. I think that'd be a fun one. You know, obviously, I'm in a ridiculously awesome spot right now when I beat Charles Oliveira. It's hard to even think about the fights at 170 when you're about to fight for the title. I feel I'm one win away from the title at 155, but there's so many fun fights up there. So we'll see.
Thank you.
You mentioned.
Yes.
So Mike, obviously you fought Charles before, and kind of going into that fight, there was like a school of thought with Charles that he fades in these fights, right? He doesn't come back, like he's not going to be there. He showed against you that wasn't necessarily the case. He kind of erased that narrative as the champion. How did he kind of defy maybe some of your expectations, if he did, in that one, and how has that perception of him maybe changed during his time as champion?
I love it because nobody wants to be known as a quitter. Nobody wants to be known as unreliable. Nobody wants to be known as the guy who doesn't perform under the lights. But that's who Charles Oliveira was for a while, and I think that's not a knock on him. It's okay for all of us to go through our ups and downs and our peaks and our valleys and grow as a human being. A little kid from the favelas with a big dream ends up becoming UFC champion, but it wasn't without a little bit of hardship and a little bit of real criticism that he deserved. He was losing fights that he shouldn't have lost. He was missing weight, which is the biggest pet peeve of mine. We are supposed to be professionals. But then he was able to put it all together. And he has put it all together. And he has erased all of that. Now, with that being said, I think, I said in an interview yesterday, everyone's got a little bit of quit in them no matter what, no matter how tough you are, right? It's just about finding that chink in their armor, finding that crack, pushing them to that point. But Charles has continued to elevate that portion of him. And I believe I'm fighting the best Charles Oliveira that we have ever seen, the most dangerous Charles Oliveira that we have ever seen. And when the stakes are high, I decide to turn it on, and I'm excited about it.